You know, I'm very interested to speak to you today because in preparation for our interview, I've been watching some of the Fox News appearances, looking at the book, etc. I never really saw you as a guy who delved into political issues per se. You seem more willing, interested, and I must say, maybe more conservative than I thought you were. Is that a fair assessment?
Not at all,
Okay.
because I am so not political you can't even believe it.
And so I don't
Yeah.
want to make this where I tell you about how political all the stuff you say is, but the reason why I say it is a lot of the language in the book and when you talk about issues like immigration and culture and others, it seems as though it alludes to going back to the good old days, individual decisions in the style that many Republicans now talk about with regard to schooling and parenting, et cetera. But you're saying it's just not the case.
No, and that doesn't mean that there aren't politicians on both sides of the aisle that talk about these issues. But if you really think about raising a family in America, whether it's now or 50 years ago or 20 years down the road, we still have to keep our eye on what I think are core issues in America. And I think the backbone of America is the family unit. I really think that if we have strong families, if we have strong family values, and I think that our families in America, as you've heard me say and read me say, are under attack.
All right, guys. So I gotta admit, I did not have Dr. Phil becoming based and then going on a common sense tour to restore traditional values to this country, because even somebody like him who claims to be non-political, he is seeing the writing on the wall. Okay, he's seeing the decay and decline of this country, and he's clearly and obviously trying to sell a book as well too. But still, I gotta commend the guy, because when you have somebody that is on mainstream liberal media television and he comes out and he starts talking about how the family unit is being attacked in this country and how the far left is basically insane, you gotta kind of give him some props, okay? Because you don't really see it very often where these guys that made their career being a part of the media actually come out and to push back against the far left agenda. Usually you have to be on board with the far left agenda, okay? And unfortunately in this country, if you stand up for common sense and decency, things that used to be normal, beliefs that used to be normal, that means that you're a right-winger, right? That means that you are conservative, which is what David Pakman is going to accuse Dr. Phil of being in this interview, which he's going to say that, yeah, you sound like a conservative, you sound like a Republican, when I think that Dr. Phil actually just sounds like a normal person with common sense, right? Which in today's political climate, apparently that makes you a conservative, okay? So I want to go ahead and react to this video of David Pakman confronting Dr. Phil, and Dr. Phil basically just giving some common sense here, okay? And I think that Dr. Phil is a refreshing voice of reason, even though I don't necessarily agree with everything that he said. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Yeah.
Then we've got some where we've got people that are just trying to change some of the core values in America, core values of family, trying to rewrite history. And we've got people that are coming in saying, well, we want to change history, we want to change what kids are being taught in history, we want to change biology, we want to change all of the things that we have for 100 years had empirical data to support.
But so he's talking about the left, right? That's who he's talking about. Now, again, one of my issues with Dr. Phil is that, hey, I support your common sense tour, and I get it. He doesn't want to be overtly political, but a vast majority of the things that he's complaining about are from the left, okay? That is what he's complaining. He's complaining about the far left agenda. And remember, David Pakman is a far leftist. So, of course, he's going to take some issue with what Dr. Phil is saying here.
Tell me more about, I don't want to gloss over this. I really want to understand this. Changing history. Okay, what was the history that used to be taught that now has been changed by the tyranny of the fringe?
Well, pick an area. We can talk about biology, where we have always had two sexes.
But what about
But
history?
now-
Just to pick history, not biology, because you said history, biology. What about history?
Well, yeah, of course, David Pakman doesn't want to deal with biology because, again, his side of the aisle will get destroyed on that, right? So he's going to make sure that, let's not talk about biology, okay? That's the obvious one that the left is trying to change, right? Biology. They don't want to deal with that, okay? So, of course, he's going to try to pick history because they love to talk about this one right here.
Well, there's a lot of history to biology, and you would be missing a big point to pretend that there's not historical biology. But if you want to talk about history, we can, not in biology, but just talk about the history of mankind.
Yeah.
We've got areas where they don't want to talk about slavery. We had one group of people that wanted to start describing slavery in history books as involuntary relocation.
Now, I understand why Dr. Phil is bringing this up because, again, he's trying to not seem biased, right? That's what he's trying to do here. But what he's talking about is a very, very, very small group, like 9 people that were a group of like educators in Texas that in an early draft of their education curriculum, their standards that they review every few years, very early draft for the 2nd grade curriculum, they proposed talking about slavery as involuntary relocation. Okay, we're talking about the 2nd grade curriculum. Okay, but that was scrapped, right? It was scrapped instantly, and there's been no instances of any state, any conservative or Republican state trying to erase slavery, right? So, Dr. Phil here is bringing up, again, a very, very, very fringe thing that happened that had no traction whatsoever, wasn't serious, but mainstream liberal media blew it out of proportion. But the reason why he's doing that is he don't want to seem biased. But just listening to the way he's talking about this, you know that he knows that the real problem with extremism in this country really comes from the left.
Right.
This was not involuntary relocation. This was slavery. And we've got people that are wanting to rename schools because people that were doing what were the mores and folkways of the times now would clearly be doing things against the law, certainly against mores and folkways, because they were slave owners at the time, are saying, well, now we have to tear down these statues, we have to rename these schools, and we don't want to teach about them. We have to...
Yeah, this is a much bigger problem than what Dr. Phil was talking about as his right-wing example of extremism, because that's essentially what he was doing. This is much more prevalent. I mean, you have the 1619 Project, in which they're trying to literally rewrite American history. And if you don't agree with this idea that the American Revolution was fought over slavery, which is preposterous, it's ridiculous, it's just downright false. Okay, if you don't agree with that, then you're racist, right? And you hate black women because a black woman came up with this nonsense, right? This is what they're doing. Okay, what Dr. Phil is talking about in terms of renaming schools, we've seen this, tearing down statues, we've seen it. They are trying to erase American history, okay, based off these moral standards that these people only hold the founders of this country to, like the great people of this country, the people that actually done positive things for this country to, because they damn sure don't hold the criminals to this standard. Like, for example, George Floyd, who they build statues of, right? They don't think that, you know, he was a bad guy that we probably should not be building statues of. But, you know, George Washington was a bad guy, or Abraham Lincoln was a bad guy, or Thomas Jefferson was a bad guy, okay? Over things that back in the day, the moral standards were different than they are today.
To learn from our mistakes as a society. We can't pretend those things didn't happen. They did happen. They were dark and ugly times in American history. We don't want to pretend those things weren't there.
So let me see if I understand,
crazy.
because there's a
Yeah,
bunch.
exactly. Right. And I remember this, and I'll never forget this when I was at UNC Chapel Hill dealing with the Silent Sam thing, right? The Confederate statue that the woke revolutionaries were so upset about. I mean, they were renaming buildings and stuff like that on campus. And I was just thinking about stuff the whole time. I was like, this has absolutely zero effect on me as a so-called student of color, right? As a black student, it had zero effect on me. In fact, I hated it, right? I absolutely hated when they were trying to tear down Silent Sam. I mean, eventually they were successful in doing it, but I hated it at the time. Okay, it just really showed me how extreme these people are, because just like Dr. Phil is saying, those statues to me, I see them as history. Well, I'm like, oh, okay, like this is a reminder of what happened, right? I don't see it as, oh, it's oppressing me because these people enslaved my ancestors. No, that's not the way I see it, right? I literally see it as a reminder of this is what this country's been through. And despite what this country's been through, I'm on this college campus, right? I have opportunities in this country despite the past, right? And we've learned from our mistakes. But the only way to make sure that we don't forget about what happened and to avoid repeating those mistakes is to be reminded of the history, which is, I think, the purpose of, keeping these monuments up, which is to remind us that, hey, this is the history of this country. This is what we went through, so that we make sure we don't go through that again. We don't repeat the same mistakes that we made before in the past, but that's not what the left wants. They want to tear down history. They want to erase history, and then they want to accuse the right of doing that, right? When that's actually what they're doing.
So if I hear you correctly, you're not in agreement with those who want to minimize the tragedy and brutality of slavery,
which is few and far between, right? Which is basically non-existent. This is a made-up talking point from left.
But you also want to keep the school names. If a school is named after a slave owner, you're also okay with that because it will remind us and we will learn from it. Am I understanding that correctly?
I think you're oversimplifying what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you're wanting to change American history to pretend that these people did not exist, and you want to measure them by today's yardstick rather than the yardstick at the time, that's what is referred to as presentism. And that's like saying, okay, you're going to drive through a neighborhood and the speed limit is 20. And you drive through that neighborhood doing 20, and then they come along and say, you know what, we're going to change the speed limit to 10, and we're going to give you a ticket for speeding when the speed limit was 20. It's now 10, but you weren't speeding when you were doing 20, but now it's 10. We're going to give you a retroactive ticket for doing what was acceptable at the time. That's called presentism. We're going to take what was done back at the time, pull it up into the current time, and condemn you for not knowing what was going to be acceptable 200 years later than when you did it. And I think that is really narcissistic and arrogant and rewriting history instead of letting people learn from the mistakes that were made in America and that we need to learn from so we don't make those mistakes again. Because
yeah, so I don't think that this is conservative, right? I think that this is common sense. I think this is somebody being reasonable. But again, common sense, being reasonable, right? Being normal, okay? Not getting triggered by everything. That makes you conservative, according to people like David Pakman.
Some of those people also did some really good things at the time. We don't need to endorse everything they did, but we need to acknowledge the good and the bad.
So now I'm going to fast forward to the part of the interview where Dr. Field talks about the decline in church attendance and Christianity and religious values in this country, which he says is contributing to the decline of this country, the attack on the family unit, and a decline in birth rates, which is an issue that I talked about a lot recently in another video.
Couple other things that I wanted to ask you about. When it comes to what you see happening in the political space right now, approaching it from a cultural perspective, as you say that you do you agree that a decline in religiosity is a problem in the United States, or is that not a concern to you?
It is a concern to me. I think we've seen church membership drop below the 50% mark for the first time in our country's history. And I think that that's a problem for a variety of reasons. And one of them being that that's one of the times that families tend to spend quality time together. It's time that they put their phones down. It's time that they usually got together and would go do something as a unit and focus on values that were constructive to the family. There was often meditation time involved. There was often discussions about what was discussed in church that day. They often had Sunday dinner together afterwards and spent quality time like they did no other time during the day. And I think it also is a product of our lessened birth rate, which has dropped because a lot of people join church when they have children because they want their child to be baptized or christened or whatever. And the fact that we've seen our birth rate drop to around 1.6 from 2.1, which is necessary to sustain
Yes.
our infrastructure right now, is a problem. And it seems that that's one of the main reasons that church membership has dropped off. There's fewer kids to go get baptized, christened, or whatever, so people have less reason to go to church, and that's a byproduct of the lesser birth rate.
Well, I personally think that it's the other way around, right? This is why I disagree with Dr. Phil. I personally think that the birth rate being lower is actually a byproduct of a decline in religiosity, okay? I believe that that's actually the case, not the other way around, in the sense that the decline in religion is a product of a low birth rate, okay? I actually think that because we don't have the same traditional family structure, and the values that we used to have, we don't value it as much as we used to. We're not, starting these big families. I think that's actually what is contributing to the decline in birth rate because, being in church and adhering to, Christian values, even, you talk about Islam, whatever, right? Like that actually incentivizes start a family, right? You're told to get married, be fruitful and multiply, right? This is what you're supposed to do. Okay. And that is on the decline. Okay. And I think that that's probably what is contributing to the lower birth rate more so than anything. So I think that Dr. Phil kind of has it backwards here, but I get exactly where he's coming from. And he's making a very important point that you never hear, again, from people who, are in the liberal media.
What do you make of the correlation, anyway, that as church attendance has declined, which you rightly point out, the rate of violent crime and murder in the United States has also been declining? Do you think there's anything because a lot of times the claim is made that as you remove God, whether it's from school or whatever, bad things happen, crime rates go up, etc. But we continue to see violent crime rates decline in the United States, correlating with decreased church attendance. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that that is a correlation, and I think some crime is declining in some areas and it's going up in others. But I think the idea,
AKA liberal cities, right? AKA crime is going up in liberal cities, is declining in places that are not liberal cities. Again, I wish Dr. Phil, I know he's not trying to really be overtly political, right? But you can't really speak the truth unless you call it out for what it is, okay? Just call out for what it is, Dr. Phil.
is that if we will work to consecrate crime, put some measure of consequence that goes with the crimes that are happening, and give these people some result for what they do and give them some opportunity to turn their life around, learn how to do things differently than what they're doing, then we'll see it continue to decline in the areas where we've got good trends and turn it around in areas where we don't. But what I think is most important, particularly among our young people, is that we make sure that our parents are involved in our kids' lives so they don't get started in even misdemeanor crime right now.
That's shoplifting.
For sure. Shoplifting is up, and these are misdemeanors, a lot of which don't get prosecuted. And you wonder, a lot of this is happening with young kids, and I fear they're getting exploited by gangs, and you wonder, where are their parents? If they are vulnerable to gangs using them to go do shoplifting, which annually is over $100 billion a year in terms of overall loss and shrinkage from corporations, then somebody's doing that, and a lot of it is organized crime, and they're exploiting young people to do it because they know there's not a lot of consequence for it. And you got to wonder, where are their parents? Do they know what they're doing? Are they talking to them about this? Are they discussing it with them so that they don't get caught up in that? And that's not a violent crime most of the time, but it's still a crime, and it speaks to the values that they're holding or not holding.
Yeah, again, so according to David Pakman, what Dr. Phil just explained, what he just laid out there so eloquently, is right-wing talking points, right? Talking about the problem with crime in this country, particularly when you're looking at things like shoplifting. Where are the parents? This is a question I ask almost every video. Where are the parents? Okay, where are the parents? Same question Dr. Phil is asking, right? He's connecting the dots in regards to the issues with this country, and he's coming at it from a perspective that, again, we used to consider as just basic common sense, but now it's considered conservative and right-wing to, have this perspective.
I know that we're at the end of our time, and I don't want to keep you over. I'll remind the audience, the new book is We've Got Issues, How You Can Stand Strong for America's Soul and Sanity. I really appreciate your time and insights, and being totally transparent, having never spoken to you before. A lot of what you're saying sounds very conservative to me, which doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. I happen not to be a conservative. Some in our audience are. That's my read of it all. And I think it's very interesting to see you wading into some of these topics.
And don't forget that I said I was going to send you a list of professors that have had consequences, and I expect you to share that with your listeners when I do.
We will include it in the YouTube description. You have my promise, sir.
All right. And you have my promise, I'll send it to you.
All right. Appreciate.
Yeah. So you seen that, you heard that. Okay. The left is, it's pretty hilarious. Dr. Phil did end up sending those sources. Okay. And I guess that, David Pakman got schooled there, but yeah, I mean, it's amazing to me how they try to shift the Overton window, right? And they try to make it seem like what Dr. Phil is saying is fringe. And that's what they do, right? They try to shift the Overton window by saying that, well, all these things that as a society, whether you were conservative or liberal, okay, maybe back in the, 50s or 60s, okay, we used to all believe, hey, this is reasonable, right? It's reasonably tough on crime. It's reasonable to, have some control over immigration, right? It is reasonable to not want to change history and tear down statues of our founders. Now, all of a sudden, that is right wing, right? You're conservative. You're on the right side of the political aisle. Again, they do this on purpose, right? Because they want to make it seem like you're crazy, and that's what they're going to do to Dr. Phil, right? They're going to try to make it seem like this guy's some right wing lunatic. He's MAGA, but when you listen to him, he's not actually really MAGA, and he's not really that right. Okay, I think that he's probably centrist, and probably, to be honest with you, probably center right slightly, but again, not an unreasonable person, right? Very reasonable. But again, being a reasonable person makes you a staunch conservative right-winger in 2024. Let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.